Okay, good evening, and I'm going to get started. I sent out a source sheet that has the same name as last week, but it has been updated, and a lot of material has been added to the source sheet. I am going to share my screen. I know that makes it easier for some of you. Others of you are going to follow on whatever you printed out.
Okay.
So instead of constantly sending out a new source sheet with a new name, this is still Rebbe Meir. And so I just added the material I'm going to be teaching today on the source sheet. So that just to clarify. I hope
Nechama,
everyone is well and comfortable wherever
Nechama,
you are. Yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't know how to access your source sheets. I couldn't
they
find,
didn't send them out on the email.
I didn't see it in an email from last week or this week, and I saw it
Oh,
on your screen last week, but it's very small.
okay, so I'm gonna say, okay, Marcia, because I have your email, I can, is there someone here from Matan?
I
I see
tried,
someone's here from Matan. Can you make sure?
Yeah, I'm here. I can make the source sheets are on the website and sent out.
Okay, send them to Marcia, please. Okay, and so I'm going to begin teaching. So we had started looking at Rabbi Meir. We had seen, I'll just let me get into Zoom and I was supposed to be sharing, but I don't think I did. Did I? Oh, I did. I'm sharing my screen. That's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. Rabbi Meir. Okay. And I will try to make it a little bigger. Yeah, I should be able to make it bigger. Okay. So we're going to be coming, I called this Rabbi Meir all about the light of Torah. I said Rabbi Meir is a little bit elusive. We see him everywhere. And yet who he is, what his character is a little bit elusive. We don't know what his yichus is, where he comes from. We know who he studies with, but we don't know much about his family. And, the source I started with was Rabbi Meir, who reads the Torah in a different way. He reads the passage, which is so easily translated, kutonet or with an ayin, as garments of leather, garments of hide, as kutnot or with an aleph, light. And that says a lot, really, about who Rabbi Meir is and his unique interpretation and the way that he's engaging with the text in a way that is different, that is other than the way his colleagues are. We then looked at quickly that he is one of the students that Rabbi Akiva ordains. We see that Rabbi Meir also is the Stam Mishnah. He's the unattributed source. When there's no attribution in the Mishnah, it's Rabbi Meir. We see that in the Yerushalmi, this idea that Rabbi Akiva has two preeminent students, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he preferences Rabbi Meir, or he says Rabbi Meir will come first. That causes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai to become yellow, to become, I wonder if it, I don't know if green or not. Is it envy? Is it heartbreak? That his teacher seems to favor his colleague. And Rabbi Akiva uses that language, dayecha, Dayacha shani ubaracha makirin kochacha. He basically says to Rabbi Shimon, it's enough. It's enough that I and God know your strength. You don't need more public admiration. That's not who you are, and that's not where your Torah is going to go. And a few other stories like that. One of the last stories I brought was Rabbi Meir, who is very intuitive about names. And when they stayed at an inn, he recognized the word Kidur. The name of the innkeeper was Kidur, and that allowed him to protect his own pocket of money, his own purse of money. His other colleagues fell into the trap of trusting the innkeeper. It's the second story we saw about an innkeeper and Rabbi Meir, where Rabbi Meir just bests the wicked innkeeper by using a kind of intuition that his colleagues don't seem to have. So that's where we left off. That was just a very quick review. We're now going to move on. We're going to look at a source in Yevamot. I don't bring the English and the Hebrew when the original text is mostly Aramaic, or then I'm going to have to do double translation. So I took the liberty of some of the sources just bringing in the Svaria English. just to also make it a little easier for us in terms of time. So what we're going to see here is in Yavamot 121. And what we're looking at are the contrasts between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir and those who are opposite him, in order to more deeply understand a character who both has a unique relationship with his wife, Bruria. He has a unique relationship with his teacher, Elisha ben Abuya, who has not yet appeared on the scene. We're going to get to Elisha ben Abuya, but we're going to see a willingness on the part of Rabbi Meir to learn from different rabbis. It is taught in a Braita. Rabban Gamliel said, once I was traveling on a boat, and from a distance, I saw a boat that shattered and sank. And I was grieved over the apparent death of the Torah scholar who was on board. And who was it? Rabbi Akiva. But when I disembarked onto dry land, lo and behold, Rabbi Akiva came and sat and deliberated before me about halacha. I said to him, my son, who brought you up from the water? He said to me, a plank from the boat came to me, and I bent my head before each and every wave that came toward me. The waves did not wash me off. I reached the shore. From here, the sages stated, if wicked people come upon a person, he should bend his head before them, meaning he should temporarily restrain himself. What we'd say, if a bear comes upon you, play dead, not fight them, and then you will be saved. And if I open up Rav Benny Lau, page 161 in volume 3 of the Sages, I know some of you like to know where I am in the book. Rabbi Akiva clasps onto the board of a ship and he goes with the flow and he bows his head so every wave passes over him. And we see here an act of submission that Rabbi Akiva is willing to submit to each wave until he makes his way to shore. After this statement, the Gemara returns to Rabbi Gamliel's story. I said at that moment, how great are the words of the sages who said, if a man fell into a body of water with a visible end, his wife is permitted to remarry, but in the case of an endless body of water, his wife is prohibited. Now, this is what's very odd. The point is that if you fall into a lake and the man never reappears, we assume he's dead because the body of water has a visible end. And the feeling is that if he doesn't resurface in a day, 2 days, 3 days, there's nowhere for him to go where he won't be seen. Whereas an ocean, which is an endless body of water, intuitively we would say, of course, he drowned or was eaten by sharks. But the reality is we can't fully determine his death because there are all sorts of odd stories of people washing up somewhere on an island, making their way eventually back to shore, maybe years later. We know that there are some bizarre stories of people who are shipwrecked, who years later are saved. And so the Chazal rule halachically that a woman is only permitted to remarry if her husband was seen capsizing and drowning in a defined body of water. But in an ocean, we have no, even though, again, as I said, it seems more obvious he would drown in an ocean. But here we have Rabbi Akiva, and Rabban Gamliel was sure he drowned. How could he possibly have survived? And we discover that he did. He bowed his head before the wave, and eventually he made his way to shore, despite a shipwreck that seemed like it had no survivors. So I'm not going into the Rabban Gamliel piece of the story. It is in Yevamot. Yevamot, especially towards the end, is dealing with the presumption of death of the husband. When can we presume? When can't we presume? I'm more interested in the anecdote because we're going to see Rabbi Meir is in the next anecdote. But nonetheless, I always like to share a little bit of the context of the Talmudic discourse. It is taught in a Braita, Rabbi Akiva said, once I was traveling on a boat, and I saw a certain boat sinking at sea, and I was grieved over the death of the Torah scholar who was on board. And who was it? Rabbi Meir. But when I disembarked at the province of Cappadocia, he came and sat and deliberated before me about halacha. I said to him, I love these stories, by the way, where like, the main character seems to have exited, has died, and suddenly they show up and they're teaching Torah. I said to him, my son, who brought you up on the water, he said to me, one wave carried me to another, and that other wave to another, until I reached the shore, and a wave cast me up onto dry land. And so what we hear about Rabbi Meir is that he's battling the surf. One wave sweeps him to the next, and the next to the next. He struggles as he goes from wave to wave. He doesn't submit. And this is a very different response and a different way of traveling than the way Rabbi Akiva traveled through the waves. So that's just a very interesting contrast. And so we're going to see the end of the story. I said at that moment, how great are the words of the sages who said, if a man fell into a body of water with a visible end, his wife is permitted to remarry. In the case of an endless body of water, his wife is prohibited. It's the same exact teaching of Rabban Gamliel in response to the Rabbi Akiva story. Rabbi Akiva then applies it when he sees what's happened to Rabbi Meir rather than to himself. And often we don't fully understand a psak halacha or a piece of Torah until suddenly we're in a situation where we can fully understand it. And that seems to be what's happening here. Rabbi Akiva says, now I understand. Right now I understand the greatness of the sages. So I bring this story because we have Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir as the main characters in the story. And both of them have a similar experience, but their journeys are radically different. What?
Sorry, can I just ask, an endless body of water, what does that mean exactly? Was he still alive?
Good, right. So an endless body of water would be an ocean.
Okay.
Whereas
it says
a body of water that has a visible end would be a lake or a river. That would really be the contrast.
No, yes,
right?
but why is his wife prohibited from remarrying?
Okay. Yes, now I understand your question.
That's my question.
I'll stop sharing for a moment. One of our concerns when a man, let's take the World Trade Center, okay? When the two towers collapsed, it became clear that there were men who had been in the towers who disappeared. And what do you do about permitting their wives to remarry? Can we say with absolute certainty that the men are dead? They're presumed dead. They're missing, presumed dead. But in order to permit a woman to remarry, we have to have, if not absolute certainty, a very great degree of certainty. And Rabbi Howard Jafter, Chaim Jafter, has a really interesting series. It's a little technical, but you could read the beginning and the end and really get a sense of it. He has a 4-part series of how the Beit Din in America ended up permitting all the women to remarry. But some of them were tricky because they didn't have proof that the man had been in the building. They only had the wife saying, well, he goes to work, that's where he works, but they didn't have any proof that he was in the building. And there's always this fear, and unfortunately in history it happens, that a man will use an opportunity to sneak away and build a new life. Now, they want to know if the marriage was happy. I mean, there are all sorts of things they want to check, and DNA testing was essential, and actually the punch cards getting into the building and out of the building were essential. There were all sorts of ways they did it. But I think they had 1 or 2 cases where there was an assumption the man had been in the building, but there wasn't actually proof, and they had to work very hard to free those women. Now I'm going to our Gemara. I brought you an example that was probably more relatable. If a ship capsizes in a river and the boat sinks and whatever survivors swim out and no one else swims out, the understanding is, since it's a body of water with a visible end, if the man had survived, he would have ended up on one of the shores we can actually see, the river, the lake, and so on, a visible shore, and would have been seen by someone. He couldn't have disappeared completely. He would have been seen by someone. If he was injured, he would have been cared for, and so on. The problem with an ocean, it's a body of water that has no end. Now, chances are the guy drowned, but is there a possibility that without our being able to see, because it's a body of water without an end, he somehow survived maybe on an island somewhere, and now he's alive, and she's still a married woman? How can she remarry? It's terrible. She's an aguna, you can say, but she's a woman whose husband is alive. We can't have enough absolute certainty to be able to declare her a widow. And so these two stories are a boat that capsizes in the middle of the ocean, and yet through some, we're going to say divine intervention, but even that, some twist of fate, some luck, they manage to use the waves and a plank of wood to get back to shore. But notice that Rabban Gamliel in the first story and Rabbi Akiva in the second story are sure that they're dead. A boat capsizes in the ocean, you assume they're dead. And yet we have stories where these two men survived. And so the halachic presumption, as odd as it seems, is a boat that capsizes in an ocean actually raises more uncertainty than a boat that capsizes in a river. Okay, you can agree or not agree. I'm just explaining the presumption. That's what we're talking about. So the part of the story that I'm interested in is the way they each get to shore. One submits to the waves and one fights to like go over the wave to the next wave. Whether that's a realistic description or more of an anecdote, I don't know. We certainly have this idea of maaseh avot siman lebanim, this idea of what the teacher experiences, the student in the next generation experiences. But in both cases, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva use the anecdote to reinforce the greatness of the sages' very unintuitive explanation, understanding of the body without end. Okay, that's what we're looking at. Okay, let's go back to
Thank you very
the next
much.
story. Of course. Please, clarifying questions, I'm always happy to take and are hopefully helpful for everybody. An incident with indelible ink. Now, this is the story I spent quite a bit of time preparing today. It's a very, very interesting story. Caught between the schools of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. And what I'm preparing the stage for really is a person who is able to study in two competing schools. It would be a little bit like going from Beit Shammai to Beit Hillel, or the schools of Shammai to Hillel and back. We don't really have students who do that. Especially Shammaists tend to be very, very loyal to Shammai. Same thing with those who study with Hillel. Very similar to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. Just to remind us, Rabbi Akiva believes every word of Torah has within it potential for drash. He's the one, remember, who Moshe Rabbeinu goes to is shown the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Akiva. Kadosh Baruch Hu takes Moshe Rabbeinu to watch Rabbi Akiva learn and teach Torah. And he finds Rabbi Akiva, well, the story actually starts with God tying crowns on each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And Moshe Rabbeinu asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what are you doing? And he says, I'm preparing the ground for a scholar named Akiva who's going to come along and is going to be able to lidrosh drashot from every crown, every addition, anything extraneous. And so Rabbi Akiva is known for being a darshan, unlike anyone who came before him, and he's able to doresh vavim v'tafim, right? The crowns and the extra vavs and so on. Duplicate words. Rabbi Ishmael is diametrically opposite Rabbi Akiva. He believes the Torah is written b'lashon b'nei Adam. We did some of this, I think, last year when we studied Rabbi Ishmael. He believes the Torah is written b'lashon b'nei Adam. And so if there's a vav, if there's a word mot yumat, it's not meant to teach two halachot. It's just meant to reinforce an idea. It's literary. It's not meant to be a pedagogical device for interpretation. So it's interesting that Rabbi Meir is going to go between the two schools. That's what we're going to see, a story where Rabbi Meir is caught between the schools of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael, and how does he handle that? So we're going to say for Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Samche. Now, since I have the Hebrew and it's short, we can read it also in the Hebrew. And wait a minute, didn't Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava ordain Rabbi Meir? V'ha'amar Rabba bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan kol ha'omer Rabbi Meir lo samchu Rabbi Akiva eno ala Torah. Wait a minute, this is a known problem that we have one source that says Yehuda ben Bava, before he was pierced 300 times with the spears of the Romans, ordained basically the 5 students of Rabbi Akiva. But didn't Rabbi Akiva ordain them? And now we're specifically looking at Rabbi Meir. So, Rabbi Akiva ordained him. Samchei Rabbi Akiva v'lo kiblu. Samchei Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava v'kiblu. So this is very interesting. And what's here in the brackets, in the parentheses, is an attempt to give an explanation. I want to suggest that the paragraph, the parentheses is really an interpretation. Let's go to what it literally says. Rabbi Akiva ordains Rabbi Meir, and the ordination is not initially accepted. He needs to be reordained by Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, and only then do the people accept his ordination. This says to me something that I've been fleshing out. There's something other about Rabbi Meir. No one's debating his acuity, his scholarship, his greatness. But last week we saw a source where they said the halacha does not follow Rabbi Meir because we don't really understand Rabbi Meir, say his colleagues. He can convince us something is tameh and then turn around and give arguments that it's tahor, and we're confused. We don't really know what's what. And so we're seeing here as well something dissonant a little bit, something different, something out of the ordinary in the scholarship of Rabbi Meir. It doesn't take away from his greatness in Torah, but it shows that within the world of Midrash, there's something a little out of sync. So that even though Rabbi Akiva ordains him, lo kiblu, and what do we say in parentheses? As Rabbi Meir was still very young. I don't know where the parentheses come from. Often parentheses, I'm sorry, Rashi says this. I don't know where Rashi gets it, if that's a bit of maybe an apologetic or an easier way to read the story. It is from Rashi. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba then ordains him. He's older, he's wiser, he's more mature, and they accept it. No one's going to doubt his scholarship. The question is, where does he fit in the chain of transmission of Torah? So we said, Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. I hope you're understanding that he is an incredibly important and significant Torah scholar. But these in-between sources suggest something that is complex, something that is different, and maybe that is the reason. He can learn with Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. He can marry Bruya. He can learn with Elisha ben Abuya, even after Elisha ben Abuya becomes Acher. Elisha ben Abuya, his teacher, really is called Acher. But there's something Acher, something other about Rabbi Meir. Okay, let's take a look at the next source. As they were walking, he saw Beit Midrash. So we're in Moed Katan. We're in a story of Avelut after the Churban. He said to him, here Rabbi Meir sat and reported traditions in the name of Rabbi Ishmael, but he never reported traditions in the name of Rabbi Akiva. So these are two Amoraim, and I'm sorry I cut out, and I didn't write down, that's really my bad, that I didn't write down who the Amoraim are. But whoever's having this dialogue, one of them says, this is where Rabbi Meir reported traditions in the name of Rabbi Ishmael. But the tradition is he never reported traditions in the name of the Rabbi Akiva. And the person who answers says, what are you talking about? Everyone knows that Rabbi Meir was the student of Rabbi Akiva. Right? He didn't have to report traditions in the name of Rabbi Akiva. He was the student of Rabbi Akiva. And maybe that's why he was makpid to report traditions in the name of Rabbi Ishmael, to show that he had learned with both men. That's what's coming up for me in the story. But we're seeing here the complexity of a person who sits in the Beit Midrash and teaches traditions in the name of the Rav, who is in the contrast, is in the competing Beit Midrash, the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Ishmael, and according to this story, never reported traditions in the name of his Rav. That might be a little Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, that we know that Beit Hillel would teach the teachings of Beit Shammai first before teaching their own teachings, maybe even more extreme, because this tradition says he didn't even report traditions in the name of Rabbi Akiva, as opposed to Beit Shammai, who did not do that. Okay. We're now going to get into the story about the ink. That's where we're leading to. I'm already going to say this sugya in Eruvin about the Lechi is not what we're really interested in focusing on. We're interested in the Rabbi Ishmael part of the story, but we're going to go back a little to lead in. The Mishnah relates that a student recited a halacha before Rabbi Akiva, and he did not accept the student's version of the dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, because Rabbi Akiva said they disagree about an alley less than 4 cubits wide and about an alley more than 4 cubits wide, whether you need a lechi, whether you need some sort of post. And Rabbi Akiva says Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree about this space, less than 4 cubits, and that space, the opening of the alley, is more than 4 cubits. The Gemara asks, in that case, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva is identical with the Tanakama, because the Tanakama in the Mishnah also holds that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree in all of these. So the Gemara then has to resolve, we don't want Rabbi Akiva repeating what is obvious in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, no, there's a difference between them with regard to halacha. Some stated by Rav Achlai, some say it was Rabbi Yechiel, the name sounds similar, that an alleyway less than 4 handbreadths, 4 amot, requires 4 tefach requires no action, but their respective opinions are not defined. Which Tana accepts the view of Rabbi Achlai and which rejects it cannot be determined. So there's an attempt to try to resolve this Rabbi Akiva and the Mishnah concern, that Rabbi Akiva wouldn't just spit out what the Mishnah so obviously said. And some said, well, maybe the machloket is not when it's less than 4 cubits wide, it's when it's less than 4 tefachim, which is even smaller than a cubit, and maybe that's the debate. Okay. It was taught in a Braita that Rabbi Akiva said, Rabbi Yishmael did not state this matter. No, it can't be that it was Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael could not have stated the matter. It was the disciple who stated that matter on his own, and the halacha is in accordance with that disciple. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva basically says it can't be that Rabbi Yishmael would make a mistake and not know what the machloket was. I think that's what it is between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Hold on one second. Someone as wise as Rabbi Yishmael, right? Rabbi Akiva says, I have a tradition that Beit Shammai argue, even in regard to an entranceway narrower than 4 amot. Wait, so narrower than 4. Oh, right. They argue with narrower than 4 amot. They don't agree. And Rabbi Yishmael knew this, and he would have agreed with me. Okay, that's the background. As I said, Eruvin is very confusing. I don't want to go into the particulars. Yevamot is much easier for me than Eruvin. But what I'm interested in is what happens after. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said. Rabbi Akiva, this is the part that's interesting. Rabbi Akiva said the halacha is in accordance with that disciple only to sharpen the minds of his students with his statement. He wants to encourage his students to suggest novel opinions. He praises the disciple, but he doesn't rule in accordance with the disciple, which, by the way, is super Rabbi Akiva. We know that Rabbi Akiva definitely wants to encourage his students to learn, to be innovative. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, the statement of the disciple appears to be reasonable, although Rabbi Yishmael himself did not make the statement of the disciple is reasonable. So we have Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't necessarily agree with the disciple, who's just agreeing in order to encourage the disciple. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says that the disciple is reasonable. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, anywhere you find a statement introduced with a certain disciple said before Rabbi Akiva in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, this is where our story really starts. It is none other than Rabbi Meir, who was the student who served both Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. As it was taught in a Braita that Rabbi Meir said, when I was a student with Rabbi Yishmael, I used to put kankantom into the ink. Kankantom appears in all Mishnahs having to do with writing. If you've learned Masechet Shabbat, if you've learned Masechet Gittin, if you've learned Masechet Ketubot, all of them talk about using kankantom. It's iron sulfate, and it makes the ink more durable. That's what we're talking about. The ink becomes more durable. And he did not say anything to me. I put kankantom into the ink, and I was writing Sifrei Torah. And by the way, last week we saw Rabbi Meir is able to write Megillat Esther by heart when he comes to a place when there's no Megillat Esther. So we know that he is a competent scribe, and a competent scribe who can pass down text accurately. So he says, I was a student with Rabbi Yishmael, I put the Kan Tom into the ink. When I came to Rabbi Akiva, he prohibited me from doing so. Okay. Now what we're seeing is a machloket, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, around whether you can put Kan Tom, something permanent, into the ink, and then the Torah scrolls, the letters will not be able to be erased. Very interesting. Also on a deeper level, the idea of whether you can or should be able to erase writing in the Torah is more than just a technical debate. It's how we look at I'm trying to look for another word beside rigidity, the importance of not erasing one word of the Torah, right? Which might speak to how flexible, how durable, what are we thinking about when we write a Torah scroll? So just hold that, I'll explain more in a moment. The Gemara challenges this, is that so? Didn't Rabbi Yehuda say that Shmuel said in the name of Rabbi Meir? Now, the first statement is a braita with Rabbi Meir saying directly, now I have Shmuel in the name of Rabbi Meir. When I studied with Rabbi Akiva as his disciple, I used to put Kan Tom, iron sulfate, into the ink. He did not say anything. When I came to study with Rabbi Yishmael, he said to me, what is your vocation? I replied to him, I'm a scribe, a lavlar, I write Torah. He said to me, my son, be careful in your vocation, as your vocation is heavenly servants, and care must be taken lest you omit a single letter or add a single letter, and you will end up destroying the whole world, its entirety. So right now we're in the middle of a conversation. Notice something shifted here. It is when he's with Rabbi Akiva that he's using Kan Tom. When he goes to Rabbi Yishmael is watching him, asks him what he does. He says, I'm a scribe. And he says to him, well, you have to be very careful. You can't omit a single letter. You can't add a single letter. And Rabbi Meir reassures him and says, I have one substance called Kan Tom, which I place into the ink, and therefore I'm not concerned. And Rabbi Yishmael responds and says, may one place iron sulfate into the ink? Didn't the Torah state, and the priest shall write these curses in a book and he shall blot them out? The Torah requires writing that can be blotted out. So what we have here is an exact opposite. Rabbi Akiva allowed the Kan Tom, and Rabbi Yishmael did not allow the Kan Tom because of the passage in Sota. And now what do? I have one version of the story where Rabbi Akiva prevents it, and one version of the story where it's Rabbi Yishmael. They cannot both be true. The Gemara now tries to clarify. What is Rabbi Yishmael saying to Rabbi Meir? What is he answering him? The Gemara explains as follows. This is what Rabbi Meir is saying to Rabbi Yishmael. There is no need, first of all, Rabbi Meir bringing in iron sulfate doesn't seem to answer the concern for omissions and additions. And now, of course, we're in a place where we brought in the Sota. We're going to talk about the Sota in a minute, because we never erase the parchment of the Torah where the Sota Parsha is written. We actually write a separate scroll. So I'm just, again, hold on to that. I'm seeding that. We're going to come back to it. There is no need to mention defective and clean words, deficient or additional words, as I am an expert. How even with regard to concern that a fly might come and land on the letter Dalet and blot it out and render it a resh, don't worry about that. I use iron sulfate and place it into the ink, so if a fly drops down onto the crown of a Dalet, the Dalet is fixed. It's like a fixative, spraying a fixative. That's what artists do at the end of their, after they paint, so that nothing smudge, right? So he says, I don't spray fixative, God forbid, on the Sefer Torah, but I put a fixative into the ink, and then I don't have to worry about something like a fly, which, by the way, is a really big concern, right? The idea, we can imagine when the ink is wet, if flies drop down onto the wet ink, even today, they're going to cause a problem. Nevertheless, so First of all, I've now answered. What I've done until now, I haven't resolved the discrepancy, but I've explained why Rabbi Meir says to Rabbi Ishmael, don't worry about omissions and additions, first of all, because I'm an expert. And you don't even have to worry that a dalid will be blotted into a resh, which, by the way, changes the word completely, because I use iron sulfate. This leaves Rabbi Ishmael to say, I don't think you can use iron sulfate. You have to be able to blot out the words in the Torah scroll because of the sota. Okay. Well, there's a difficulty between service and service. What does that mean? One source states Rabbi Ishmael served Rabbi Akiva. The other source states he served Rabbi Ishmael. Who did he serve first? There's a difficulty between that he prohibited. In one, Rabbi Akiva prohibits it. One, Rabbi Ishmael prohibits it. The Gemara comments, I'm going down here. So I have two problems. Who did he serve first? Did he serve Rabbi Ishmael? Did he serve Rabbi Akiva? Because in source one, he's first at Rabbi Ishmael, then goes to Rabbi Akiva. Second source, he goes from Rabbi Akiva to Rabbi Ishmael. Second of all, who prohibited it? Right? It's a mystery. Granted, there is no difficulty between the accounts, between service and service. Why? This is a beautiful, classic Talmudic explanation. Initially, he came to Rabbi Akiva, and he couldn't understand him. So then he went to Rabbi Ishmael, who was easier to understand, studied the tradition, and then went back to Rabbi Akiva. First, he had to understand Bilashon B'nei Adam, and only then could he go and understand the crowns and the vavs and the logical analysis. Okay, so that's one way. Now, what are we going to do? So that's one way of understanding that in both stories, we can read it that he first went to Akiva and then to Ishmael and then back to Akiva, and that resolves that question. But I still have a difficulty, because there's a difficulty whether Rabbi Akiva prohibits iron sulfate or Rabbi Ishmael prohibits it. And that remains difficult. The Gemara notes, it indeed remains difficult. No answer was found. So this to me is, again, classic Talmud. We actually don't know. We have such a discrepancy. We have such a conflict with no way of resolving it. We're going to see in a minute the Yerushalmi is going to resolve it. Don't worry, I'm going to resolve it. But the Bavli decides to leave it as kashya. No answer was found. The Gemara continues the discussion of iron sulfate. It was Tana Breita. Rabbi Yehuda says that Rabbi Meir would say, one may place iron sulfate into the ink that is to be used for all sacred writing, except for the passage of sota. So this resolves, in my opinion, the possible concern of Rabbi Ishmael. So maybe we can neutralize. Maybe we say, but in the next paragraph, we open up a possibility to find a resolution that he's going to use the iron sulfate everywhere except in the Torah passage that Rabbi Ishmael was concerned. Rabbi Yaakov says in his name, except for the writing of the Torah passage with regard to a sota in the temple. The Gemara says, what is the difference? So Rabbi Yirmiyah says the difference between their opinions is whether you erase the passage from the Torah scroll or you have, in Rabbi Meir would say, except for the writing of the Torah passage with regard to a sota, which seems to be within the Torah scroll. Rabbi Yaakov seems to say, no, the writing of the Torah passage with regard to a sota used in the temple, which was a separate scroll. And we know that when we read the chapter on sota, it's clear you write all of the curses of the sota, the whole, whatever you write, the Allah, Aleph Lamed Hey, which is a curse, into a separate scroll, and then you dissolve the ink into water with some dirt. So Rabbi Meir, at least in the Reisha, seems to be talking about an entire Torah scroll, and that's why you can't use kantom in the passage of the sota, because it seems like you might need to erase the passage from a Torah scroll. That to me seems to be a less convincing argument, but Rabbi Yaakov then says you would have a separate Torah scroll and then you wouldn't have a problem. Okay, so the Bavli leaves us with a kashya and also gives us a possible resolution that maybe you can use kantom in the entire Torah scroll, because for the sota, you're going to use an extra Torah scroll with the parsha of the sota, and then we wouldn't have any issues. So maybe then Rabbi Ishmael would be appeased, maybe. He does not write, now we're in Sota. Now we're in Masechet Sota. He does not write on a wooden plank or on a papyrus or on diphthera. I do not write the parsha of the Sota that's going to be erased on a wooden plank, a papyrus, or a diphthera, which is inadequately processed parchment, only on a scroll, like a Torah scroll. It has to be prepared the same way. As it says Basefer in a book, he does not write with gum or vitriol or with anything leaving a permanent impression except with ink. It is written, he shall wipe off, writing that can be wiped off. So what I am now in the Sechet Sota. I'm actually in the Yerushalmi, but this is the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the same for everyone. And what we find out here is, very specifically, we do not write with indelible ink. We certainly would not use kankanto on the parsha of the Sota that I write B'Sefer in a book, in the book that's going to be erased. And then she's going to hold the scroll and she's going to drink. Actually, I don't know if she holds the scroll. She holds the barley offering. That we're going to erase the ink in the water from the kior, and she's going to drink. And he writes. I could think writes with ink or vermilion or gum or copper sulfate. The verse says he shall wipe off. If he has to erase, I could think one writes with drinks or fruit juice. The verse says he shall write. How is that? Writing that can be wiped off. What is this? This is ink without vitriol. Okay. And vitriol is the same as kankantom. It's the iron sulfate. I don't know why sometimes it's called vitriol and sometimes it's translated as iron sulfate. I'm guessing vitriol is an older, old-fashioned way of saying it, and iron sulfate gives us modern clarity, but two different translations. So what we find out is you have to write in order to erase, but you might think you could write with fruit juice, which they talk about in the Gemara, right? You know, if you take orange juice, you could write with it, but when it dries, it's going to essentially be invisible. You have to write with something that actually writes, but does not leave a permanent impression, and that is so you cannot use kankantom. You can use ink, right? You can't use gum or vitriol, you have to use ink. But did we not state if he wiped off from a Torah scroll, it is valid? Explaining it following the Tana who stated, Rabbi Meir said, all the time we were studying with Rabbi Yishmael, we put no vitriol in the ink. So the Yerushalmi does not have a kasha. The Yerushalmi says, based on Rabbi Yishmael's reading of the Parsha of Sota, which is written B'Lashon Adam, you actually wipe off the Parsha of the Sota when you test the Sota directly from the Torah scroll, and you have her drink that ink directly from the Torah scroll. That goes back to what we saw is the argument. Remember I said it was Rabbi Meir versus how Rabbi Yirmiyah understood it. Is it only on the separate scroll that we erase? Is it the Torah scroll? The Yerushalmi is very clear. It's from the Torah scroll, and Rabbi Yishmael did not allow us to put vitriol in the ink. I don't know in the ink of all the Torah or just in the ink of the Parsha of the Sota, but it's Rabbi Yishmael who prohibited it. And my guess is you would just rewrite the Parsha afterwards. You would, you would remove the ink into water, and then I'm guessing you wouldn't leave it empty. You would rewrite the Parsha, right? Because there was no iron sulfate. Okay, so the Bavli is kasha. The Yerushalmi makes the call. They say explicitly that it's because Rabbi Meir was studying with Rabbi Yishmael that he did not put kankantom in the ink, that he wrote at least the Parsha of the Sota on. Now we're going to look at one more, we're going to see two more sources. In Masechet Sefer Torah, Masechet Sefer Torah is a minor tractate about how we write Sefer Torahs. Hamochek et ot achad min Hashem, over below ta'aseh. If you wipe away a single letter of a divine name, you transgress a negative commandment. Amar Rabbi Yishmael, L'kach ne'amar va'avadtem et shma min ha'makom ha'hu, v'ne'amar lo ta'asun kein la'Hashem Elokechem. So what we find out is when we talk about idolatry, you shall destroy their name out of that place. And it's also written, you should not do so unto the Lord your God. It is permissible, however, to wipe away ink that dropped on the writing, since one's intention is only to rectify it. So it seems like, at least, if I had to summarize, Rabbi Yishmael does not allow kankantom to be used in writing the parsha of the Sota and in writing Hashem's name. Because you're not allowed, right, he's saying, sorry, he would, it sounds to me he would use, he would allow, he would not use kankantom in the parsha of the Sota, but it's possible, no, that's not adding up. Let me read Rav Kook and then I'll go back because I know there's a point I want to make there. Rav Kook says it very nicely, but there's also something that, hold on, give me one moment because I did all, okay. According to Rabbi Yishmael, I see, the entire Torah could be written in a script that could be erased, right? Rabbi Yishmael says, we do not use kankantom. I just didn't finish formulating my sentence. My apologies. We do not use kankantom in the Torah because if we end up erasing a word, we'll just rectify it. It's okay. Nothing will happen. Where would we use kankantom? The name of Hashem. The name of Hashem, because we don't want a situation we're going to accidentally, even accidentally, wipe away a single letter of a divine name. So Rabbi Meir did not recognize, so Rabbi Yishmael, so this is the point Rabbi Benny Lau makes, and I think it's a good one. He says, Rabbi Yishmael says, you can use erasable ink. He prohibits kankantom throughout the Torah, except when it comes to writing the name of Hashem, maybe the parsha of the Sota. I'm going to leave that as an aside. Otherwise, it is permissible to erase in order to fix. Rabbi Yishmael, however, did not recognize a distinction. When he learned with Rabbi Yishmael, all he knows is that you can't use kankantom at all. And that shows perhaps a distinction between how Rabbi Meir is learning from Rabbi Yishmael. And I'm gonna explain. When Rabbi Meir arrives at Rabbi Yishmael's Beit Midrash, and again, I'm reading this the way Rav Lau reads it, but I like this reading, and we're going to end with Rav Kook, who reads it differently. Rabbi Yishmael is concerned when he hears Rabbi Meir as a scribe. Rabbi Meir says, no, don't worry, I have kankantom, don't worry. As a student of Rabbi Akiva, who derived new teaching from each crown, Rabbi Meir wants to make sure that nothing can be erased, that the crowns are not affected by a fly accidentally dropping into the ink. And so Rabbi Meir is using kankantom in order to preserve anything that new that is written will endure permanently, even the crowns, right? The crowns are something, interpreting the crowns is something that is new. And Rabbi Meir says, since Rabbi Akiva is doresh, I'm going to make sure there's a permanence to the crowns and they can't be erased, even though it's something new. So vitriol, the kankantom, guarantees a measure of stability, and that the innovation of Rabbi Akiva and what came before would not fade at any point. Rabbi Yishmael, on the other hand, feels vitriol is a potion of death. Words of Torah written in kankantom were lifeless, since they can no longer be erased, right? The difference is Rabbi Yishmael is not afraid of wiping away the ink in order to rectify. So what you end up seeing is two worldviews. And Rabbeinu Lau says the difference between the first luchot and the second. The first luchot were given by God, and as a result, right, nothing could be changed. The second luchot, we understand, were the ones written by Moshe. So tradition has it. And so the first tablets are shattered. Now we have the second tablets. And Rabbi Yishmael is one who feels the Torah is katub l'shon adam. He's not afraid of an erasure because we can rectify that. There's something human about things being erased and then written over. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, or Rabbi Meir, is a student of Rabbi Akiva, says, no. I want to make sure there's a fixedness. a stability, a permanence of the words of Torah, including the crowns, so that they can't be erased, that nothing can be erased, because we're going to treat it like the first luchot, something that is divine. So that might have been a little complex, and I need myself, it's a new to think over. The Bavli leaves it as a machloket, a kasha. We don't know which is Rabbi Akiva, which is Rabbi Yishmael. The Yerushalmi comes along and says, look, it's really not that difficult. It's Rabbi Yishmael who holds that you can't use kankantom, that it's okay if letters of the Torah are erased because they can always be written again. We don't want anything to become too fixed except Shem Hashem. Except Shem Hashem. Shem Hashem, that's fixed. That you can use kankantom for. And so what we're in is a machloket that may be much bigger than the use of any particular kind of ink. It may be about the fixed nature of interpretation versus something more flexible, something more fluid, something more human. The divine versus the human. There's no right or wrong here, but it just reflects perhaps two diametric, they're not really opposed. They're both learning Torah. They're both L'Shem Hashem, but they have very different ways at looking at how Torah is to be interpreted and how Torah is to be passed on. And Rabbi Meir, who comes from the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Akiva, that's how we resolved it, into the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Yishmael, and is then going to go back to Rabbi Akiva, has already absorbed enough from his Rebbe that essentially he wants to put kankantom into his ink and create a much more fixed surface, a much more fixed situation for the text. Now, I think that's actually quite beautiful and profound, and there's a lot to think about there. I want to bring us Rav Kook, who is going to read it differently, because as I said, the Bavli doesn't resolve the machlok. Rabbi Meir, whose colleagues could not fathom the depths of his reasoning, had a Torah scroll in which note or with an aleph was written. The Yerushalmi states, here was a messianic one. That is, the spiritual light of one such as he would illuminate the world, as if the messianic light had already obliterated the wicked like smoke. He felt, there was no need to prevent the use of vitriol, kankantom. And indeed, he felt that banning it led to great loss, for he believed the possibility of erasure was antithetical to the refined lucidity of heavenly light that illuminates the eyes of Torah scholars with the law. So he would add vitriol to his ink on principle. But Rabbi Akiva told him the world was still beholden to the power of erasure. So I'm going to hold Rav Lau's interpretation, which is in contrast to Rav Kook's interpretation, but they're saying something similar, that in Kook, it's Rabbi Meir himself, not because of Rabbi Yishmael, who feels we don't need to prevent kankantom, because it could lead to the possibility of erasure. And if anything is erased, it will somehow erode the lucidity of heavenly light. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, you don't need to worry. The world is still beholden to the power of erasure. And now what I'm going to say is, I'm not sure exactly what Rav Kook means here, what he means that Rabbi Akiva means. If I go back to Rav Lau and say that Rav Kook is suggesting what Rav Lau suggests is Rabbi Yishmael's position, that that we need something that will allow the words to be like erasure is necessary in order to increase the life, or to add life to words of Torah. Maybe that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. I'm not sure. Again, I've brought some ideas that I'm teaching for the first time in text that I'm teaching for the first time. Rabbi Meir is caught within these sort, not caught. He is the conduit. He is the bridge throughout all of these sources. And I really think most powerfully, Rav Kook bringing the kutnot, or the fact that Rabbi Meir the scribe has amended the ayin to aleph. It sounds the same. If I hear it in shul, I'm not going to know the difference. It is possible this is his private Sefer Torah, and no one else is meant to see it. But for him, the garments of divine light are what those of us who learn Torah are clothed in. Then you can understand that for him, the words of Torah need to be fixed with kankantom in order not to lessen some of that divine light. And either Rabbi Yishmael or Rabbi Akiva both protest, right? They say, no, there is something powerful in erasure, and then tikkun, right? In fixing, in rebuilding, and rehabilitating, in something being erased, which is a very human flaw, right? The ability that we can erase text, God wouldn't erase text, but that we can then write on top of it or rewrite it. There's something in that process that seems to be significant to whoever protests kan kanton, and whether it be Rabbi Yishmael or Rabbi Akiva. So, and Rabbi Meir remains the one who walks around with his kan kanton to put into the ink, and yet he knows one of his teachers is not in favor, right? And yet he goes from Beit Midrash to Beit Midrash. So we're going to pause there. We're going to stop there. I know it's a few minutes early. If anyone wants to comment or share, I don't want to start the last text. It will take too long, and it deserves its own examination. And what I'm going to do is add the last few sources about Rabbi Meir onto this template, and we're going to finish with Rabbi Meir next week. Maybe we'll even start Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya. But the sense we're getting is the great Torah scholar, he's willing to learn from different teachers. He himself comes up with his own hashkafat olam, his own way of seeing the world that seems to be tied to his livelihood as a scribe, as the person who writes the words of Torah, the Torah that to him illuminate divine light onto the scroll, and who battles the waves, right? Who doesn't submit, but yet who jumps from one wave to another until he makes his way to shore. That's the Rebbe Meir that we have been examining, that we've been learning, that we've been encountering. And we'll try, as we get to the last class, to tie it to some other sources I've brought in the past that I'll just allude to. We won't learn in depth because I don't want to be too repetitive. But we'll try to see if, after going through a few more sources, we can create a greater composite of who this character of Rebbe Meir is. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Nechama,
Yes.
is it possible for you to
Joanna.
put the pages in your source texts?
Yes. Yes, I can send them. Anyone who wants. Let me take your. Let me see if I have. I'll take your email. Hold on one second. I'm happy to take. Go ahead. What's your email?
Sorry, KUSHNIRE at 013net.net.
Okay, I'll send it to you right now. And I'll send it to Marcia.
You don't need to. I printed out the source sheets, but all I'm saying, if the source sheets are numbered, it's much easier to follow them. Sometimes I get the sheets mixed up. Are you with me?
The numbering. Yes, of course. Oh, that's what you were asking. Yes. Oh, I thought I had. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm working on a template. I'm going to tell Matan. Okay, I'm going to write to them right now that they should number the source sheets. Very good. Very good.
Book recently.
Very important. Thank you. Okay.
Nechama, you published a book recently?
What?
You published a book recently.
I did. Yes, I did. I'm covered. Yes.
That's out of.
Thank you. Thank you. And I had a grandchild, 2 very beautiful initiatives.
Wonderful, wonderful. Enjoy.
Mazel
Amen,
tov,
amen. Hope you're
mazel
well.
tov.
Thank you. Thank you. Has your husband written any more books?
My husband? No.
Yeah. No.
Actually,
Okay.
he published a book a few months ago